Okay. All right, so welcome everyone. This is my first time giving this talk. I've given archaeology talks every year and different talks that I just kind of tweak a little bit. This is a brand new presentation because it's actually a brand new area of scholarship in the historical world, is this whole interest for the last several years. How is it that a small band of former fishermen converted the Roman Empire? Why would Romans, who ran the world, why would they even listen to former fishermen from Galilee? So look, we know what happened. We know the end of the story. We did win, so I kind of titled it Christians 1, Romans 0. We're still here. They're long gone. But how that happened, we just don't want to take it for granted that it happened. What was the dynamics? What occurred? How did it happen? So let me just begin with this picture. This is Jesus on the Mount of Olives, right before he ascends into heaven, and he gives what's called the Great Commission. And he says, go into the whole world and baptize the entire world in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And there he is pointing to the Greco-Roman world at that time. And I love the picture of this guy right here. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that little red dot? I like this guy right here. I know what he's thinking. He's saying something like this. He's got to be kidding. Are you serious? Do you know who's out there? We're not going out there. But they did. They did. And they won. They were victorious. So let me just begin by just talking about what this gentleman knows, what he knows about the Greco-Roman Empire. So we're going to let him kind of speak to us about what he was going into. So this is the Roman Empire. You see all those different shades of green. It was approximately the size of the continental United States. Okay, that's very, very big. So just imagine you're in San Diego and Jesus looks at you and says, I want you to go out as far as Maine, across the country, 3,000 miles away, and bring everybody back, bring everybody to the Lord. You would just go, are you kidding? Now, the Roman Empire around the time of Jesus approximately had 50 to 60 million people. Maybe shortly after the time of Jesus, maybe 1,000 or so Christians. At the time of St. Paul and St. Peter, maybe 10,000 Christians. And still about 60 million Romans. Around the year 300, still around 60 million Romans and 10 million Christians. So this is not people coming in. This is not Christians, people becoming Christians by immigration. These are Roman citizens themselves changing. And that's remarkable. It's hard to get these hard numbers, but they pretty much figure about 10 to maybe 15 to 20% of the Roman Empire was Christian around the time that the Roman emperor became Christian. So this story is going to end at that point, when the Roman emperor becomes Christian, because then it kind of, off to the races, it kind of explodes after that. But prior to that time, a lot of interest about, just why this happened. The second thing about the Roman Empire is why it got so big. We don't want to take it for granted that simply people like to conquer things. The basis of the Roman Empire, the basis of the Roman culture was intense and deep paranoia. It was an extremely paranoid people. And the reason is, about 300 years prior to Christ, Rome was conquered and sacked by Gauls. The Gauls were the tribes that lived in modern France today. And they came down and they sacked, and they stayed for a week and smashed all the China. They just really destroyed a lot of stuff. It was a trauma for the Roman people. And they basically said, never, ever, ever, ever again. Now, sometimes when someone is bullied when they're a child, and then they go up to be a bodybuilder, and now they have muscles that are bigger than your spare tire, right? It's really the same kind of thing, right? Rome was bullied by the Gauls when they were earlier in the empire, and they basically pumped up and became so powerful, and the whole idea was that no one will ever conquer us again. Now, mechanically, the way they did that is they said, okay, here's the city of Rome, here's our fence on either side, There's a kingdom on the other side, and we're paranoid. So we're going to conquer that kingdom and then put the fence further out on the other side of that kingdom. And then the other kingdom on the other side of that, we conquer that and put the fence out further from that. You see what's going on? So the whole purpose of conquest was to keep the fences moving further and further and further and further out from Rome. Because if the fences are further and further away, we feel safer. So again, the purpose of conquest was twofold. Get that fence as far away from Rome as you can, and anybody that we conquer, we can collect taxes. We're not interested in running them. Rome was not doing conquest because they were interested in controlling these people. All they wanted was safety. Get that fence out there and collect money. As long as you don't bother us, you're fine. You can keep your own king. We're not interested in taking over your country. We just want the fence on the other side, and we want your money. Now remember, Rome is very paranoid. If you have a really paranoid neighbor, let's say you have a crotchety old guy neighbor who's really paranoid, but every time you see him, he's carrying a gun. Are you going to make him nervous? Are you going to call him names? No, you're going to be very quiet. Okay, so that was the same way. As long as you didn't make Rome nervous, you were okay. But if you did anything to make Rome nervous, they pulled out that gun and they shot you quickly. And I mean massive retaliation. It was not just putting you down. It was to put you down in such a cruel, horrendous, brutal way that all of the other neighbors would say, we ain't doing that. One of the things they used to do, and this comes up later on, is that they would find out, first of all, they would just kill everybody and smash them. Later on, when the Jews rebelled in the Holy Land, they sent several armies down. 1 million Jews died. It was a brutal crush. You remember the Jerusalem temple? They disassembled it. They just didn't burn it, they disassembled it. In fact, they did such a good job disassembling it that archaeologists today have a hard time finding out where it actually was. It was so damaged. And then for the Christians, they find out, where is your holiest place? What is your most sacred religious shrine? And they would do investigations to make sure they wouldn't miss. They would find out, where is your holiest shrine? Is this it right here? This area right here? Right here? Is this it? And they would smash it and then put their temple on top, because they were just showing, we are Rome, and you will not interfere with Rome. Does that make sense? I'm just kind of going on this because this is the Roman Empire that these people are going out to. And it was very cruel, very, 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 very harsh. Now, and again, it was a culture that was based on paranoia, and so it admired power. Now, I'm going to tell you something that's a little disturbing, but I don't mean to be disturbing, but just to tell you that this is the way it was. If you were walking in the streets of Rome, and you came around the corner, and you saw 2 young men beating up an old man, and the old man is on the ground, and these men are kicking him, you would naturally join in, kicking the old man on the ground. It would never occur to you to help the old guy. He's a loser. He's weak. Why would you take the side of an old man on the ground? You would instantly take the side of the winners because you are a Roman. Now, having said that, I'm actually gratified to see the expression of shock on your face, because it is a horrible image, and I'm glad to see that. But the fact that you have that feeling, the fact that you are horrified at that image, that's actually the legacy of 2,000 years of Christianity. That's actually the result of Christianity after these 2,000 years. 2,000 years of looking at the Son of God on a cross getting beat up has activated the sense of compassion in people's hearts across cultures. That make sense? So that's kind of jumping ahead. So let's talk more about this experience of Rome. So obviously Rome would have these large monumental buildings, and they were built purposely large and monumental, again, to evoke the image of power and domination and hugeness and bigness, and you are stupid and we are Rome, okay? Now, if you looked at a picture of New York, a picture of LA and San Francisco, you could probably tell which city is which. There's differences in architecture. You can't tell in a Roman city. A Roman city in England, France, Germany, Spain, Morocco, Jerusalem, exactly the same. Every Roman city is exactly the same. And again, it's their way of saying, we could care less about your culture, we're Rome. We put in the city the way we like it, all right? And you get these monumental buildings like the Colosseum. So let me talk about Roman religion. That's enough about the culture. It was power, it was about domination, and it was about paranoia. Now, Roman religion is very unique, and I'm going to give you a picture of, this is a fairly accurate picture of the Roman god Zeus. Who knew? Now, it actually is accurate. Now, the Corleone family, okay, you have the capo di tutti capi, right? Don Corleone. And you have all of the captains, and the whole point, and you see the man here kissing his hand, right? Because remember the scene at the wedding? He comes and he asks for a favor, right? Don Corleone, on the day of your daughter's wedding, may I ask you this favor, right? And Don Corleone says, God forbid I should ask you for a return favor, but for you, I will do this, right? Now, remember, because the man is basically going to give something to Don Corleone, and Don Corleone is going to give something to the man, all right? And what's the classic mob phrase? Nothing personal, strictly business. That is the definition of Roman religion. Nothing personal, strictly business. The Roman gods were the exact equivalent of a mob family. If you just took a mob family here on earth and raised them up to Mount Olympus, it was the exact equivalent. The whole purpose of your relationship with Zeus was the exact same relationship as this man with Don Corleone. I need something, or I want the gods. I either need the gods for a favor, or I want them off my back, right? So for instance, Don Corleone will walk into a neighborhood bar and say, this is a nice restaurant you have here. It'd be a shame something should happen to it. Right? So now you got to pay him an envelope, right? You have to give him an envelope with some bucks in it, and now what you're doing is you're paying a protection racket. So you're paying Don Corleone to leave your restaurant alone. It's the exact same thing in Roman religion. You went to the temple to sacrifice to the gods, either to say to Zeus, help my farm, or get off my back. You know, leave me alone or help me out. So really, I'm not saying that this is kind of like a mob family. It is exactly like a mob family. But the takeaway phrase is really this classic mob phrase. Of course, it's no accident that the mob comes from Italy. Now look, my grandparents are from Italy. I mean, I know it well, you know. So, nothing, and again, this phrase really summarizes everything. Strictly business, nothing personal. Nobody ever thought of Zeus caring for you. And you didn't care for the gods. There was no personal relationship going on here. It was strictly a series of envelopes going back and forth. This is another family of, this is Corleone family again. Now, Romans actually respected Jews. This is a modern picture, but I was just fascinated by the fact that, you know, if you go to the Colosseum today, they have people dressed up in Roman costumes for you to take a picture. So this happened to be a picture of a Roman guy with a modern Jew, but just to say that Romans actually respected Jews because of their antiquity. Jews had been around at this time, since at the time of Jesus, Jews had been around for 2,000 years. Rome only 700 years. So even though they didn't care for Judaism or didn't understand it or didn't mean anything to them, they respected age, antiquity. Rome was very conservative. They didn't like new things, right? That's typically a paranoid person. If you're paranoid and something new happens, whatever it is, your reaction is, what's that? Because it's new, it's frightening, right? So they didn't like new things, but they admired the antiquity of Judaism, and they liked the fact that the Jews kept to themselves. They didn't seek converts. They weren't troubling anybody else. They kind of kept to themselves. Now, a couple of times they revolted, and they were massively smashed, like the 1 million people that died in the revolt of 66 to 70. And then they revolted later on in 134. And at that time in 134 AD, that's when the Romans came and they smashed the Christian sacred place and put their temple on top of that sacred place. And then ironically, later on, when Queen Helena was looking for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, looking for where was the Holy Sepulchre and where was Calvary, ironically, the archaeological remains of that Roman temple ended up verifying where it was. Thank you, Rome. Ironically, their desire to destroy the Christian site actually ended up verifying it. So ironically today, the site of Calvary is the most archaeological site in all of Israel, in all of the Holy Land, ironically, because of the paranoia of Rome. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, let's talk about the Romans' first experience of Christians. This is a scene from the Passion of the Christ, Pilate, and Jesus. And the certain things now, while Christians were part of Judaism, everything was fine. But once Christians separated from Judaism, now they are a separate religion and they're new. And the Romans instinctively were suspicious of this new group and the fact that the Jews kicked them out. This ancient group kicked them out. So this is like some kind of a renegade group. And they would collect and they would gather together. And the Romans were always suspicious of any group more than 10 people gathered together. In fact, it was against the law for more than 10 people to gather together. Because if there's 10 people talking to each other, it can't be good, all right? Because again, they're paranoid. So the first thing that really bothered the Romans was that the Christians worshipped an executed criminal. They worshipped a guy who was executed as a criminal by the Romans. They couldn't understand why you kick a man on the ground. They couldn't understand why someone would be kind of enamored of someone who was kicked on the ground like Jesus was. And the fact that they were willing to face death to worship this man. They just couldn't understand it. It was just very puzzling. And so their initial reaction was, these are really bad people. The other thing is that the Romans, they had all of these gods, and basically all ancient religions were polytheistic. Many Egyptian gods, many Greek gods, etc. Christians had none of that. Their attitude is, there's only one. And that's because Christians had a sense of objective truth. Either someone's a god or they're not. You can't have many, right? Remember, Pilate's, and so Romans had this sense of your truth, my truth, doesn't really matter. Remember Pilate's question to Jesus, what is truth? That Roman cynicism, But Christians were willing to die for objective truth. There is one God, and Jesus is the Son of God. Now, there were several Christian behaviors, again, that the Romans just found puzzling. First of all, they knew that these Christians were drowning their babies. Right? baptized into the death of Jesus, rise with him. What? You know, they're drowning babies. They're practicing cannibalism, right? Eating body and blood? Who are these people? Incest. They're calling each other brother and sister. Now remember, Romans were very, very faithful to their own family. They could care less about the family next door. They meant nothing to them, the family next door, but only their own. So they would call their own family members brother and sister. But to call other people brother and sister, there's something really kinky about these Christians. All right, so they're drowning babies, they're eating cannibalism, they're calling each other brother and sister, and they're meeting in groups of 10 or more. All of these are highly, highly suspect. So these are the things that are off-putting right at the beginning. Now, some of the same things start to begin to make a crack in Roman opposition. And that is, they couldn't understand why these Christians were kind of idolizing this executed criminal, but they were struck by the fact that they would face death for this person, and they faced that death courageously. Now, Romans loved antiquity, and they loved courage. So if someone expressed bravery, fortitude, and courage, that got their attention, because those are martial arts, right, that an army would have. So if these Christians seem to be, very, very strong that way. The second thing is, remember, Rome, never interfere with Rome. If you revolt or you interfere with Rome, they sought revenge and they crushed you. That's what they expected. So here is, they arrest these Christians, they persecute them, they throw them to the lions, they face the lions courageously with bravery and fortitude, and they don't seek revenge. Now that's another crack that's going on. What's going on with this? That they're not seeking revenge for how badly we're hurting them. This next one is really kind of almost semi-humorous, kind of. Not much is humorous at this time, but people get sick. In fact, there was a very big plague around the year 150, the Antonine plague. And, people didn't understand germs. They didn't understand infection. They had a vague idea of contagion. They knew that if you were near that person, somehow people that were near that person or handled them, they would get sick too. They didn't know the mechanism of contagion, but they had a sense that being around sick people was not good for you. So if grandma got sick, grandma went to the back of the house, and the rest of the family went to the front of the house. And grandma eventually would die. This is even within a family. So grandma she's toast. If she gets sick, she's not gonna make it. Because they didn't have this sense of compassion that much for vulnerability. Remember the old man on the ground, you kick him, they didn't like weakness. Second thing is, the father of a family had total dominion, rule over his family, life and death. And a father could have life and death over his children no matter what age the children were. There's a famous story this is in the Greco-Roman kingdom, there was a famous story of a Roman father whose son was a Roman general, and there was a battle to be fought out here, and the father said, I don't want you to go. This is an army that was threatening the Roman Empire. The son said, I gotta go, my army. He goes, he fights the battle, he wins the victory, he comes home, and his father kills him for being disobedient, and no charges. He has the right to kill his son. When a child is born, there was a custom, there was a ceremony that happened. After the child is born, the father has nothing to do with the birth. He doesn't watch it, participate, no coaching, none of that. So the father is, eventually when the child is born, they bring the child into the anteroom where the father is. And the father, let's say they come in this way, and the father is like this. So they bring in the child. If the father turns, sees the child, and gives it a name, then the child is accepted. If the father looks and then turns away, that means the child is rejected, and they take the child out into a field, put it on the ground, and walk away. That's called exposure. So no one actually kills the child directly. They just walk away from a child that's exposed. So to this day, archaeologists, when they excavate around the edges of cities, they find hundreds and hundreds of infant skeletons from exposure. So so again, when grandma gets sick, they have this, let me just show you a few more slides. So here, they're persecuted, and here's, terrible lions coming after them, and yet they take it calmly, they take it courageously, they take it bravely, and they're not angry at their persecutors. Very, very remarkable. They cared for the sick, and that means that grandma got sick. Christians in the neighborhood, in the neighboring house, they had the same understanding of sickness as the Roman family. They had no clue why people get sick. They didn't understand germs just as much as the Romans didn't understand germs. But they loved grandma. They're not going to leave grandma alone. Grandma is our brother or sister in the Lord. So we were going to care for grandma. So we're going to give her food and water and talk with her and help her and hold her and caress her and hug her and tell her how much we love her and all these things. Now, if you do that, if there's 100 people who are sick, and of those 100, all of them get that kind of attention, statistically, some of them are going to survive just because of TLC, right? And they survived. And then the Romans, who all of the grandmothers died, were wondering, how come these Roman grandmothers are living? They must have some mojo that nobody else does. They must have some magic that no one else does. And again, these are all things that are beginning to make a crack in that Roman resistance. The other thing is that the Christians gathered for Mass certainly once a week and sometimes every day before dawn. This kind of looks like a bizarre picture, but it's actually very accurate. You see how these people seem like they're laying down here? Okay, that is the way people actually sat at a table. They would be laying on their left side, laying on their elbow, and then reaching out to the table to grab food. Nobody sat in chairs. So this is the Greco-Roman style of eating, and the Christians would do that too. But the thing that struck the Romans is that around that table would be all kinds of people. Now remember, the Roman Empire is based on power. If you have any group of people in which the main ethos is paranoia and power, then everybody is concerned about who has the power and who doesn't, right? Who's up and who's down. That means everybody knows who's the big dog and the little dog, and then every level in between. It's like a pack of dogs. When a pack of dogs get together, the first thing they do is they find out who's the big dog, who's the alpha dog, and who's not. So it's the same in a Roman society. You have all these strata, and you only associated with people at your own strata. You only associated with people at your own level. One of the criticisms that Jesus had during the Gospels, and you can see it in the Gospels, is people complained, the Pharisees, who were the doctors of the law, were complaining that Jesus was asking them questions. And their attitude was, who are you to talk to us? Right? You're a carpenter. I have a PhD. So they didn't like the fact that Jesus would even talk to them. And that Jesus was talking down, or not down, but he was talking to lepers and sick people who were at this level. So Jesus was kind of going up and down the social ladder, and that was not right. And so in the same way, when Christians gathered for Mass, who was at Mass? Senators, congressmen, slaves, soldiers, and women. and men together. This is the only place anywhere in the Roman Empire where all of these people could mix. You could spend your entire life and never talk to a congressman. Probably not a bad thing, but but you would never meet a senator, or they didn't have congressmen, they had legates and tribunes, Roman officials. You would never be able to talk to someone either above you or below you, but at Mass, at the breaking of the bread, at this cannibalistic exercise, these Christians were actually mixing with one another, and men and women together in the same place. Very, very interesting. Now, that was troubling to the Romans, except, for instance, women loved it. Right? So a lot of women were becoming Christians because it was the first time that they had this kind of sense of honor and respect. Christians had this deeper sense of suffering. If a Roman got sick, it was frightening. If you got sick, you knew that you were going to end up like grandma, abandoned, right? But the Christians knew that if they got sick, they would still be covered, and they had a sense of meaning about the suffering because they had this picture of Jesus on the cross, so that they could have a context, they could have a sense of offering it up, they could have a sense of meaning. And they also had a deeper sense of afterlife, that if I do die, everybody had a sense that, God willing, you would go to heaven. Romans simply had end of everything blackness. So Christians had all these things that began to crack that hard shell of Roman opposition. And the thing that was just really, really striking was that Christians cared for people who were not of their family. They just were astounded by that they would actually come out of themselves and extend themselves to care for the grandmother who was down the block and not of my family. So all of these Christian behaviors really caught the Romans' attention, at first off-putting, and then it began to see that this was really remarkable. The main thing, though, is that the Christians did something that they had never seen anyone do before. And this is the first time this has ever happened in the history of religion. This activity that the Christians did is an absolute invention by Jesus that no one had ever done in the history of mankind. And that is, they sought converts. No other ancient religion ever sought converts. Not the Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Parthians, Greeks, or Romans. Nobody ever sought conversions. Alexander the Great conquered the known world at the time. He was happy if a conquered country became a Greek religion, but he liked it because it was for the purpose of making the Greek Empire more powerful, more stronger. The Jews never sought converts. Christians were going up to people and saying, I'd like to talk to you about Jesus. But I'm talking to you about Jesus, and if you become a Christian, we don't have an empire. We don't have an army to get bigger. I'm talking to you about Jesus because it'll make you happier. So the motive for conversion was not to make Christianity big, was not to get new members. It was not to increase the population of Christians. It was to make other people happy. Perfectly personal, nothing business, right? The exact opposite of the Roman religion. Remember, the Roman religion is strictly business, nothing personal. For Christians, it was only personal, nothing business. Does that make sense? Romans had never had that before. They never had someone actually interested in them. The emperors were only interested if you paid taxes and you stayed out of his hair and you joined the army, right? And to make you happy, they would have circuses and bread and circuses to basically keep you off his back. But none of it was relational, none of it was out of care. So Romans began to have this sense that, my gosh, somebody cares for me. So this talk is kind of in two sections. The first section is simply, I'm just describing Christians, they just live their normal Christian life, caring for grandma, gathering for inclusive table fellowship with women and men and senators and rich and poor, calling everybody brother and sister, and reaching out for converts. And then the second part is, how did they get that way? What did Jesus do during his time on planet Earth? How did he train them to do this? Do you want to hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, next week when you come back? No. Oh, by the way, this idea of seeking converts, again, was an absolute Christian invention. Nobody had ever done it before. We take it for granted now. You know, Muslims seek converts, Mormons, Christians. Again, this had never happened before. Christians invented the idea of conversion, and it was unique in the sense that the purpose of conversion was your happiness. Now, I mentioned that there's a lot of scholarly interest in this topic, how the Christians converted Rome. One of the classics was written a number of years ago by a man named Robert Wilken, and the book is called The Christians as the Romans Saw Them. It's the classic in the series. And I read it 2 years ago. I was at Notre Dame for a big conference, Notre Dame University. I didn't tell them I went to SC, but I met Notre Dame, and really everybody who's anybody, scholars, very, very famous people were coming in. It was really, these are people I never thought in my life I would ever meet. You know, I mean, really people that I've read articles, books, and everything, and they were all at this conference. It was a really big conference, about 1,000 people, and you know, it was a very heady experience. And it was all leading up to Sunday night for the big keynote address. And Mr. Big was coming in for this. I'm not going to tell you his name, but he was Mr. Big. And he really was a very, very famous man, and I was really looking forward to hearing him and meeting him. And, you know, it was a great topic. So he's talking, and I begin to, and a lot of the students actually came to hear it because he was really famous. And as he's talking, I'm just getting more and more disappointed. I'm going, oh my God, what an idiot. You know? Because, and this happens, I had met the guy before, and he is a good guy, but what happens sometimes is when they go to a university, they sometimes think they have to be a professor, and they have to speak in a very highfalutin, kind of a pseudo-intellectual manner, in a way that has the sound of erudition, but doesn't really communicate. I'm in the communication business. You know, the motto of the university is connecting faith with real life, right? And I thought this guy was basically showing off. I really thought he was just showing off, look how smart I am, and making himself sound impressive and looking big and all this kind of stuff. And I was just really disappointed that he wasn't really communicating to the audience, but really kind of puffing himself up. So at the end, they say, okay, thank you very much. There's a wine and cheese next door. So I said, I'm for that. So I just wanted to get over there and get a glass of wine. So I got a glass of wine, and I'm standing there, and I'm in clerics just like this, and there's an elderly man right here, and he turns to me. I've never met him, and he goes like this. He goes, wasn't that a load of crap? And I go, well, that's refreshing. I totally agree. It was Robert Wilken, the guy who wrote the book, The Christians as the Romans Saw Them. I go, are you kidding me? You're Robert Wilken? I just finished reading your book this morning. Are you going to be here tomorrow? I'd love for you to sign it. And he goes, no, I'm flying out tonight. So I missed him. But I actually had an email exchange with him for a couple of days afterwards, which was really kind of cool. And I go, of course, Robert Wilken, who was steeped in the knowledge of the early church and making converts, would understand that the way that the Christians had that deep habit of making someone else wiser and happier, right? That it would never occur to Christians to pump themselves up, but their life was always about the other person. And so we both had that same, I had just read his book, of course he had written the book, and so we both had the same reaction to Mr. Idiot who came and I'm not going to tell you his name, but...
That's wise.
Huh?
That's wise.
Yeah. So let me tell you how Jesus did this. And there's a very famous section in the Gospel of Luke. It is unbelievably rich in insight. A few verses, it's Luke 10, verse 1 to 24. Only 24 verses, and really only the first 10 have the most. But you cannot, there's such a rich mine of information in this one small section, and it's virtually ignored. But we're not tonight, so I'm going to share it with you. So in Luke 10, Jesus gathers 72, not 12, but 72 of his disciples together, men and women. And he's going to send them out on a practice mission. Okay, let me just advance a few more slides here. This is a picture, by the way, of sickness. It's a bas-relief. So here you have a sick person here and a person being wounded here. So these are Christians who are caring for sick people. And here we have this kind of beautiful image of Christian conversion. Here's a man who is talking to this elderly man here, but you see the interest there. You know, he's really interested in the welfare of this old man, and just very, 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 very impressively caring for him. And it kind of makes an impact on the family. Romans, Christians also had the advantage of Roman road system. So when they sought those converts, they could make advantage of an extremely effective road system. The roads are still there to this day. And they were very well organized. Every 10 miles, there was a rest stop. Every 20 miles, there was a place to get fresh horses. So you would rent a horse here, go 20 miles, leave that horse. This is basically the Uber of horses, right? And then you would get another horse and go to the next station, and you would just kind of work your way down the road. There was also a highway patrol. There was mounted cavalry that would go up and down to make sure that the roads were safe. This was for due reasons. This was for official mail, so that the Roman governor could communicate to the provinces, and for trade, and for movement of troops. So the roads were quite safe and quite effective and fast. You could really, make good time. This is a road 2,000 years later, and it's still in fairly good shape. Here's again a picture of this inclusive table fellowship. Here is a picture of the father rejecting a child. You see the mother crying, and then the brothers or the family members holding up this child. It's kind of not really a baby, but and then the father has basically turned his back, and they're gone. And here's a nice picture of a Roman woman that found a place in that table fellowship. So here's what Jesus does. He gathers his 72 disciples, and he says these things. He says, whenever you go into a house, say peace to this house. Eat what they set before you. Cure the sick. And then announce the reign of God. Okay? Now, there's about 5 other steps that he says. I'm only going to talk about these 4. Do you want to take a break right now, or do you want to hear? Keep going? Okay. So first he says, say peace to this house. Say peace. Now notice he doesn't say, be at peace. It's not enough for you to have this attitude of friendliness. You have to proactively say it. And you have to be the first to say it. Don't forget, you 72, these people think that you drown babies. They think you're cannibals. They think you practice incest, and they think that you're plotting against the Roman Empire. That's what they think already. If you don't make the first move, you are toast. You have to proactively do something right away. Now, and in other places, he basically communicates, and you hear this from Pope Benedict, Pope John Paul, Pope Francis. They say that the number one sign that someone has the presence of Christ within them is joy. All right? That is the number one indicator that someone actually has the presence of our Lord within them, is the sense of joy. And if someone is happy, what do? Smile. Now, that's why I say this is almost never done. It sounds like a good idea, but people rarely do it. Now, I remember one time years ago I was transferred to another parish, and I had just arrived, and after a couple of weeks I needed to go to the store to get that exciting shopping trip of going to an office depot and getting office supplies. It's a Saturday morning, I'm kind of dressed in civvies, and I'm leaning on a shopping cart going up and down the aisle, and I'm kind of bored. Oh, pencils, paper, just filling up. And I walk by a display of security cameras. Office Depot sells security cameras, small little things. And they frequently have one on and set up with the monitor so you can test its quality. So I'm going on, and I see the camera, and I see the monitor, and I suddenly realize that I'm on the monitor, right? Because the camera is set up. And I'm horrified. I'm shocked. Because I see myself on the monitor, and I look mean. I'm not mean. I'm a nice guy. But I look really mean. And I went, I wasn't mean, I was actually bored. I had nothing going on. But I looked mean because my face had that look. And I suddenly realized that very often my interior disposition is not matched by my exterior expression. And gravity has something to do with that, I'm sure. And it's not that I'm going to be manic about it and always looking at a mirror to say, how do I look? But if you ever wonder why it is that sometimes people react to you the way that they do, it's because they can't read your mind, and they can only go by what they see. And if you happen to have kind of a natural frown, that's going to be a handicap. Okay? I'm not going to say you're going to have an operation or something, but it's just the way we are. We are totally connected to people's faces. Hands move things. Faces move people. Okay? Faces move people. In the back, I can see someone in the back of the room. Maybe not that far, maybe midway. No, what I'm going to get at is, I can see everybody, all right, but somebody about midway, I can tell if someone is looking at me or the person just right next to me. Now, that's a small angle of the eye. And that's because the whites of their eyes are microscopically wider on one side than the other. That's how amazingly attuned we are to a person's face, and of the face, mostly the eyes. But we see the smile in peripheral vision. We can't read people's minds. We have no idea who this person is. But if they come in with a smile, this is not just, how to make friends and influence people. This is primordial psychology, and Jesus knew that, and so he said, the first thing he says is, say peace, and proactively say it. You have to be the first to say this, people. Now, I've been talking for 10 minutes now on just that first verse. That's how rich this section is. So say peace, be proactively communicating. Then he says, eat what they set before you. Now, that doesn't mean simply be a nice, polite guest and have a second helping of that food that you really didn't like. It's not really that. But you can imagine, at first glance, it must have sounded very shocking. This is a kosher community. These people practice kosher practices. You can imagine a hand goes up right away. What if it's lobster? What if it's a pig? What if it's non-kosher? Jesus says, eat what they set before you. In the Christian world, there is no kosher. But it's an even deeper meaning than this. When you go into this house, this Greco-Roman house, say peace to this house, eat what they set before you means find out what nourishes them. What's their philosophy? What's their ethos? What are the ideas that make them tick? What's this culture about? What are their values? What feeds them? Does that make sense? What nourishes them? It may be horrible. It may be wrong. The ethos, the philosophy, the culture could be horrible, but you got to know what it is. And look what happens. When you take the time to find out what it is, the person gets that and they go, wow, this person is interested in my culture and in my life and in my ethos and what makes me tick. This person is interested in me. Zeus is not interested in me. The emperor is not interested in me. But this Christian person is smiling, is at peace, and is interested in me. Right? Hasn't judged me, hasn't critiqued me, but really wants to know. That's very compelling. Then he says, cure the sick, which simply means do something really practical and helpful right away. Do something helpful. Don't be a burden. Do something that actually alleviates something right away. And then he says, announce the reign of God. Announce the salvation of God. So say peace, eat what they set before you, cure the sick, and announce the reign of God. Now, is there any message more important than how to be saved? How salvation comes, right? Can anybody think of any message that you could possibly get? A tip in the stock market? A tip at the races? A tip on where to spend eternal life? Is there any message that is more important, more powerful, more essential than how to get to heaven? Okay? Jesus puts that message last on the list. It's last. As important as it is, it's not more important than saying peace. Eat what they set before you, cure the sick, and only then can you announce the reign of God. What do people frequently do? I have a really important message, and I lead with that. I start with that. Right? Have you accepted Jesus as your personal Savior? Yes. You haven't even asked my name. You haven't taken to know what my food is. You haven't done something helpful. You haven't said peace. You've led with the message of salvation. Jesus says it's last on the list. Now, Jesus gives this dynamic many, many times in the Gospels. This is only one. Frequently, it comes across in parables. Now, Marianne mentioned that I went to SC to get a degree in marriage and family child counseling. I can tell you, almost every day I'd be in class and I would listen to a teacher speak and I would say, I've heard this before. Oh yeah, this is the parable of the... So many, many times I would hear classes on marriage and family counseling match parallel, and what I'm going to tell you is I'm going to save you $30,000 of tuition right now. Because, one of the most frequent common things that happens in married couples is innocent but damaging. Innocent but inadvertently damaging. So you have a husband and wife, and the wife gets a call from the school, and you find out that the son, was caught doing something wrong. Oh my God, now is that an important thing to talk about? Right? So the husband comes home from work, and the wife comes up and says, sit down, we've got to talk about Johnny. Okay, the husband came home from work, he had a whole big day full of stuff himself. He comes down and he says, oh my God, let me just get a beer first. Oh, fine, Johnny is not important to you. Yeah. Oh, great, thank you very much, So, she didn't say peace. How was your day? What kind of food did you have? What fed you today? Can I get you something? Those are the 3 steps. Say peace. What food did you eat today? And can I cure the sick? Can I do something helpful right away? I think the most famous example that Jesus gives is every parable has something wrong with it. Okay, That was the unique thing about Jesus' parables. Every parable has something that doesn't match what the people knew culturally, so it got their attention. We miss all of those because we're not farmers, we're not shepherds, we're not fishermen, so we miss all of them. But all of the parables had something that the first reaction of the people who heard Jesus do a parable would have been, that's not right, Just as a quick example, the parable of the lost sheep, There's a beautiful, cute little sheep that gets lost, and Jesus goes after it, isn't that nice? People hearing that parable would say, excuse me, sheep don't get lost. They are the most timid, frightened animals around. They don't get lost. Goats get lost. Sheep don't get lost. In fact, if a sheep does get lost, there's something wrong with that sheep. You don't want that sheep back. Let it go. And so, but Jesus says, yes, and I am willing to go after the stupid sheep. That's how powerful that parable is. He's saying, I am willing to go after the sheep that no one else wants. You're right, no one should have that sheep, but I will go after that sheep even if it's a really stupid sheep. All right? Now, the parable of the farmer sowing seed? Some of the seed lands on rocky soil, shallow soil, bad soil. Some of it lands on good soil, right? Now, isn't that a beautiful parable? All right? This is the way they would have heard it. What kind of a stupid farmer throws seed on rocky ground? He can see it's rocky ground. Seed is expensive. You don't throw seed on rocky ground. What kind of a stupid farmer is this? And so Jesus is saying, yes, don't be a stupid farmer. If you have something good to say, you've got to prepare the ground. Just don't, a guy comes home from work, he's rocky. He's got a thick head, You're not gonna, if you throw something at him, the seed can be perfect. The message, there's nothing wrong with the message, but if you don't prepare the ground, the seed is not going to take. Does this make sense? $30,000 right there. So the whole idea of preparing the ground is just fair, so the common mistake we make is we think that the goodness of the message is all that's needed. No. Jesus himself says the message of salvation is not enough. Even if you're throwing the good seed, he says the seed is the Word of God, even the Word of God will not work unless, like a good farmer, you prepare the ground. So it's just a really powerful way that, so again, now there's other passages, in that section, but I would say look at Luke 10, 1-24. And there's now he sends them out on that practice mission, and then they come back. And it's a really charming moment. It's very unique. They come back. Now, just imagine what's going on in Jesus' mind. He's given them this training session. They go out, and they come back, and they are successful. So you can imagine how wonderful he feels. And there's a very unique phrase that says that Jesus rejoiced in the Spirit. That's a technical phrase that means, nobody really knows exactly what it means, but it's just beyond happy. He's more than joyful. He's just ecstatic that former fishermen have done this. And then he says a very remarkable phrase. When they come back and they report all this success, he says this phrase, I saw Satan fall like lightning from the sky. Because this is what this is about anyway, fighting Satan. He says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from the sky from the actions of former fishermen. Former fishermen defeated Satan by this simple method. And that's really, really compelling. So when Jesus stood on that Mount of Olives and he sent them out into the Greco-Roman world, it was not just, without any training. And so they were confident. And they burst out of the Pentecost room and they couldn't wait to get out there. And they went into these Roman cities. They lived next door to a Roman family. They loved their grandmother. They had inclusive table fellowship. They called everybody brother and sister. If they did get arrested, they faced everything very courageously and very bravely. And they were sincerely and profoundly interested in the welfare of their fellow Romans. These fellow Romans had never encountered this before, and it began to slowly crack that shell of Roman citizenship, that Roman power, that Roman paranoia. And by the time of about the 3rd century, the beginning, after about 250 years, 15 to 20% of the Roman Empire is Christian at all levels, from slaves to soldiers to the mother of Constantine. To the emperor's mother was Christian, not Constantine. So what we'll do is I want to talk about the conversion of Constantine and this very unique circumstance going from Nero to basically sending people out into the world. And we'll talk about that. So let's just take a little stand-up break, walk around, and then we'll be back in about 2 minutes. The whole family comes in. That would be the Roman system. If the father converted, the whole family would convert. If the father didn't convert, you sometimes would have individual children who would convert, and that would be a solo experience. So sometimes you would have a family that you would have half pagan, half Christian. And that was a special challenge, and that's in the Gospels. Not at the time of Jesus, but remember the Gospels were written 40 years after the time of Jesus, at the time when the apostles are going out into the Greco-Roman world, and they are experiencing this, right? And so that's the purpose of the Gospels. If you ever want to know what does this Gospel passage mean, remember that the Gospels were entirely written for people who were missionaries. So how does this Jesus story help someone who's going into a Greco-Roman world? Does that make sense? Because that's why they were written. Not so much to tell people about Jesus, because the missionaries knew the story of Jesus backwards and forwards. But, here's this story of Jesus encountering resistance from the Pharisees. Well, they would say, I'm getting resistance from this Roman governor. So they would make the parallel. So around the year, in the late around 280 or so, 280 AD, the emperor is Diocletian. Diocletian was actually a good guy. He has a really, really bad rap in our Catholic faith, but he was actually doing what would make common sense. The barbarians are crashing at the gates. Now remember, Rome is paranoid. They have the gates way out here, the fences way out here. Well, barbarians are crashing at the gates. And Diocletian says, we need to be strong, and one of the ways of doing that is have everybody have the same religion. So if the entire community practices the same religion, it'll make the community stronger. Since only 20% are Christian and 80% are pagan, I'm going to go simply with the larger group and declare that worshiping Jupiter Corleone is the way we're going to go, and the Christians have to get on board or suffer death. So the Diocletian persecution began something like around 290 AD. It lasted for about 10 to 15 years. Like 90% of the martyrs that we have in our faith came from that period. Prior to that time, persecutions were not constant. There was the Domitian persecution and some others. Sometimes they might be only regional. Sometimes they were empire-wide. Sometimes it would be in this area, but not this area. So it was kind of hit or miss. Diocletian was empire-wide. He destroyed every Bible he could find, right? Now, having a Bible was a pretty big thing. It could take you 5 years to make a Bible, and then he would destroy it, so, goodbye. So he destroyed all the Bibles and basically said every Christian had to offer incense to the emperor or be killed. Now, Constantine is the vice emperor. He has no problem with this plan. He understands its logic. He understands the meaning of it. His mother is a Christian, but life is tough, so he doesn't have a problem with it, but he's watching. And what's happening is it's not working. The Christians are not giving in. They are all facing death, and quite strongly, quite bravely, with a lot of fortitude, a lot of strength. Remember, Romans have an eye for that. And so eventually Diocletian dies. But the other thing that Diocletian did is he organized the empire into geographic regions. Again, all this organizational stuff. He named these regions after himself. So they were called dioceses. That's where we get the word, diocese. Ironically, it comes from Diocletian. So Constantine, through a variety of remarkable events, becomes emperor. And he says, we still got the same problem. The barbarians are at the gate. But what I just saw for the last 10 or 15 years is that Diocletian chose the wrong side. I have seen with myself, my own eyes, that it's the Christians who are the stronger group. So I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to legalize Christianity. He did not make it the state religion. That's a very common mistake you hear on TV, History Channel, and things like that. Constantine did not make Christianity the state religion. He simply legalized it, made it legal. You could be a Christian and not get penalized for it or not hurt for it. But then he became enamored of it, and he was impressed by the intellectual nature of it, because by this time a lot of Christians are writing quite elegant, quite erudite, philosophical, theological treatises, and he kind of liked that. So he became really fascinated by Christianity, and he became really a very, very strong advocate. And what he did is he began to favor Christianity, and what he would do is he would take, and basically the pagan religion began to recede, so you started having empty pagan temples. Now, a pagan temple generally is called a basilica, and a basilica is an architectural term meaning a room with two aisles. So like this is a basilica right here. So here's an aisle here and an aisle here. And that's because in a basilica, the word basilica comes from the ancient word, the Greek word basileos, which means king. So it was the room where the king would sit on the throne, and the people would be on that side, and then up the middle would come a procession. Okay? So Constantine had this empty basilica building, and he gave it to the Christians. So they basically had the two aisles, and all the Christians would be in here, and they would take away the throne and put the altar up there. So the reason why our churches look the way they do today is because they are leftover pagan temples with all the people in one end and the altar at the other. Because remember how it was in the beginning, was everybody around the table, right? Everybody around the table. And now the reason we have these rectangular churches now with everybody kind of facing a raised section is the result of taking over these pagan temples. So Constantine becomes a very eager Christian, and then he does something that had never been done before in history again, is he voluntarily acknowledges, actually, I shouldn't say that, he acknowledges and accepts what is already the reality, and that is that this Christian church considers itself an alternate source of power from the king. Okay? I mean, in Egypt, the pharaoh was the pharaoh, all right? Alexander was Mr. Big, right? Caesar was the top. There was no other authority. Now, for the first time again in human history, we have a king and a bishop. And in no way did that bishop think he was under the king. There was a rival source of power that both groups accepted. It's quite remarkable. That make sense? So when they would, when the church would have a council like this, you might have the emperor in the middle, but you have all the bishops around them, and they would go back and forth. Now, in the old days, whatever the king said happened. Here, the king might say something, and a bishop would say, "No, you're wrong about that." And, they would discuss theology and whatnot. So it really was remarkable. Also, one of the things that helped the church through this entire period of several centuries was this church organization of bishops, because it kept, on a weekly basis, they would gather for Mass. On a weekly basis, they would hear a sermon. So on a weekly basis, people would be recalibrated, and that the faith would stay orthodox. It wouldn't go off the reservation, which can happen over time. So the structure and the organization of the church is also what kept it together all during this time up to the time of Constantine. Once Constantine became a Christian, then the church organization just kind of multiplied and exploded in number and influence. So that's a little bit why Constantine converted. But let me talk about this really remarkable sequence from Nero to St. Peter's in Rome. Now, Nero was without a doubt one of the most psychotic, evil Roman emperors ever, living around the year 60 AD, not too far after the time of Jesus, killed his own mother, killed his wife, children, just an extremely vain, horrible person. We don't like Nero. In fact, in the book of Revelation, they talk about the name of the beast is 666. In every ancient language, every letter was always associated with a number. Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Assyrian, Babylonian. It was just kind of a way that they liked it. And if you take the words Caesar, Nero, it comes up to the letters 666. So in the book of Revelation, Nero is really the beast. Now, he wanted to build a house, and it was going to be the largest house in the ancient world, called the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. The property for the palace was about the size of Central Park in New York. And like a third of it was going to be this one big building. However, where he wanted to build it happened to be people already living there. So guess what happened on a nice spring night in Rome? Fire. And a great portion of Rome burned. Everybody knew who did it. And it was Nero burning out these families so that he could build his personal palace not too far from the Forum. And he, of course, needed a scapegoat. So this is like around the year 63, 64. He blames the Christians, right? Because they're new, they're not Jews and all this. They drown their babies, they eat bodies and blood. They call each other brother and sister. Of course, we're going to blame them. And he rounds them up, and he either puts them into death in his Nero circus, or the other thing he did is he put them on crosses on the streets, put tar on them, and then set them on fire at night. So they would be lanterns. They would basically illuminate the streets. Now, it actually backfired a little bit, because there's Roman sources at the time that said that it was so cruel that the people began to feel for these Romans, especially because they, again, were so brave and so courageous. Again, one of these things that began to crack the Roman hardness. Now, the circus, the Nero circus where this happened, was on the Vatican Hill, just outside of the Roman area. And it was called the Vatican Hill. That was after the family name that had a farm out there. And right next to Nero Circus is a cemetery. I talked about this in my talk on archaeology, but right next to this Nero Circus is a cemetery, and that's where Peter was buried. And then later Constantine came, found the spot, built the church, and then in the early Renaissance, St. Peter's was built on that. So St. Peter's is basically built on the tomb of St. Peter. Now, Nero wanted to build this house. He successfully burned out the houses, but before he had a chance to build his house, before it was finished, he was assassinated. Happy news. Other people came in shortly afterwards. There's Emperor Vespasian and then Emperor Titus, and then the Jewish people revolted in the Holy Land. So Vespasian and then later his son Titus ran armies over there, and they just wiped out the Jews. They killed 1 million Jews at that time and wiped out the temple. The temple was largely built of gold. So the Emperor Titus took the gold from the Jewish temple and he brought it to Rome. And because it was a great victory, he built an arch. And in that arch, you see a picture of the Roman soldiers carrying a Jewish menorah from Jerusalem back to Rome. They took all this gold. And then Titus recognized that right next to Nero's house, which he didn't get to finish, he built like a 60-foot-high statue of himself. It was a colossal statue, right? So Titus did a clever thing. He said, I know Nero tried to burn down Rome to build his house for himself, but I'm a nice guy. I'm going to build something for you. Now again, this is strictly business, nothing personal, because he's doing it really for himself, because what he says is, I'm going to build an arena in which we'll have games, gladiator games, criminals to the lions, and all that kind of thing. So that's where he built the famous Colosseum. And you see next to it is the statue of Nero. The statue of Nero was a colossal statue, so the building next to it was called the Colosseum. That's where it got that name. So there's the Colosseum. They had 150 days of games when they first opened it. And there's the Arch of Titus. And you can kind of see, if you see right here. Yeah, see, here's the procession going through Rome with all the goods, all the booty from Jerusalem, and there's the Jewish menorah. So Nero tries to burn Rome. Titus comes in, gives a gift to the people with the Colosseum, and he builds the Colosseum with the gold from Jerusalem. So the gold from the Jerusalem temple actually built the Colosseum. But then, of course, see, there's an aerial view of a scale model of what Rome looked like. So there's the Colosseum. Now, later on, of course, Rome, Christians won, Rome 0. Yeah. Eventually Rome ends, right? And Christianity, basically fills in the gaps of the Roman Empire and takes over. So eventually the Colosseum begins to become into disrepair. Now Christians now are building churches. And now, of course, if you want to build a church made of stone in Rome, are you going to go 30 miles outside of Rome to a quarry? Or are you going to go to this nice collection of stones that's right there in the Colosseum and start just assemble it and take stones from the Colosseum? So the reason why the Colosseum looks like the way it does now, not because it fell down, it was actually disassembled. People took the stones of the Colosseum to build the churches of Rome. And right in the middle of St. Peter's, you see an obelisk. That's the obelisk that was in Nero's circus. So that obelisk witnessed the crucifixion of St. Peter, and the stones of the churches of Rome were actually from the Colosseum that witnessed the martyrdom of Christians. And that Colosseum was built from the gold of Jerusalem. And all of this was occasioned by the sequence of events that began by the absolute depravity of Nero. So from the evil of Nero, you have St. Peter's basically looking out into the world. So I started by saying, you never interfere with Rome. What Rome should have figured out is you never interfere with God. Thank you.